put your hands together and welcome A.G. O'Connor as he comes to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's well deserved.
Thank you all. Thanks very much. Well, so we've been hearing about courage and integrity and inspiration, focus all night long, and we are honored to have with us tonight a guy who was doing it before it was cool, right? He started off, he's from Missouri, and he started off as a state auditor, then became Attorney General for 8 years, went on to become the governor of Missouri for 8 years, and then a U.S. Senator for 6 years, later to be appointed by Governor George W. Bush as the Attorney General of the United States of America. That's the chief prosecutor. He headed a department of over 122,000 employees, which is bigger than by far than most Fortune 100 companies. He's been married 56 years, 3 kids, 6 grandkids. I asked him, what does he do when he doesn't have to? And he said he plays the piano every day. So he's a multi-talented individual, and I'm honored to know him, and I think we're all honored tonight to hear from a guy who was kind of an icebreaker, standing for integrity. Wouldn't it be nice to have a Department of Justice that was not weaponized or politicized? And I look back at John Ashcroft's career and know that he gave that type of principled, integrity, rule of law based leadership. So please help me welcome General John Ashcroft.
Thank you very much. Well, please be seated. Oh, it's great of you to stand up. Even better of you to sit back down. You know, in politics, standing ovation is frequently a cover for a mass exodus. People don't like political speeches. I love the Reagan story. You remember Reagan told about the time when the Caesar was up in the Colosseum and the lions were down there and the Christians were at one end of the Colosseum, and entertainment was to begin, and Caesar gave the command, loose the lions. The lions charged down to the end of the Colosseum, and one of the Christians stepped forward and whispered something in the ear of the lion. The lion relaxed. Now, this wasn't the lion that you've been seeing around here on the TV, but the lion walked back to his den and left the Christians alone. Caesar was really troubled. He was upset. He said to one of his minions, go get that Christian and bring him up here. Sure enough, the Christian goes trudging up. Caesar says, what did you say to that lion? He says, I just told him that after dinner there would be political speeches. And I'm not here to give a political speech, but I'm here at Jesse's invitation. He calls me up and says, Ashcroft, you've been in government for a long time and a lot of changes made during your tenure there. Do you still believe in free speech? I said, yes, I believe in free speech. He says, do you really believe in free speech? I said, yes, I do. He said, well, I want you to come to Tulsa and give one. So, you know, Brother Lynn, that's equivalent to a guy asking you to come to Tulsa and be good for nothing. And so here I am. First, I want to commend you. I believe this is important to God. There's a book in the Old, and listen, I flunked out of Sunday school, so don't expect great accuracy from me. But there's a book in the Old Testament called Malachi, and there's a verse in there in Malachi 3:16. It's amazing how many books of the Bible have a really critical verse at 3:16. But Malachi 3:16 says, God looks down, and when he sees people who respect him, talking about him and discussing him, it makes him so happy he causes a book of remembrance to be written out. Is that inspiring or not? That God looks down at what you're doing this evening, and I don't really think he has to take notes in order to remember it, but this is a signal, unmistakable signal, that God is pleased when people who respect him talk about him. Of course, there's just lots of, the New Testament just makes things so much clearer to me. And the story about that illustrates that in the New Testament to me is the two guys who are walking down the road after Jesus has been crucified. And they're walking to this town, Emmaus. Yeah, good. You must have stayed right in class after I got thrown out. But yeah, they're walking down the road to Emmaus, and they're talking, aren't they? They're a little discouraged, aren't they? And what happens? What? Jesus shows up. He actually shows up. Have you ever been a part of thinking, wish I could have been there? I mean, after all, these two guys are walking, and all of a sudden Jesus shows up and walks down the road with them, and they have dinner together. And that when people talk about God, he shows up. And I guess maybe Jesus was anticipating somebody with a little thick of skull like me because he didn't want people to think that was a one-off, unique circumstances. Oh, I wish I could have been there because it would have been special, but I missed it. 2,000 years too late. But he said at another time, anytime. There am I in the midst. Wow, what does that mean about tonight? It is sobering to me to think about how it would change my behavior if I thought about that all the time. That whenever the people of God were together talking with each other, that Jesus actually shows up, that he's there. This is not something just so important to God the Father that a book of remembrance is written about it. This is something that occasions the presence of Jesus. Of course, there's one other. Before I totally flunked out of Sunday school, we learned about another situation which was really interesting to me. Because this was a crisis situation about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yeah, my mother used that all the time. She's going to tell you a story late at night. She said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Anyhow, they're honoring God, aren't they? I tend to think that praising God is not so much singing or even yelling or speaking. Sometimes it's just conduct that praises God. And they're honoring God, and Nebuchadnezzar stokes the fire up, 7 times hotter than normally, and he throws them in, and what do they see when they look into the fire? And I think it said that who the fourth person they saw looked like somebody. So if things are in bad shape and things aren't going the way you might anticipate them, you might know that standing up for the right might literally be a situation when you occasion the very presence of the Son of God. Now there's nothing more important than I could say to you than to ask for the presence of God in what you're doing. This isn't a quiz, but before I really left Sunday school, I learned a lot on these flannel graph deals. Does any of you know what a flannel graph is, where they toss the paper up on the flannel? There was a lady named Hannah in the Old Testament. Do you remember her problem? She didn't have any children, and she wanted a child badly, and so when she had a child, his name was Samuel. You're very good. And she decided, because Samuel was a gift of God, she was taking Samuel to the temple, wasn't it? And so that this guy, the priest named Eli, Eli was going to raise him. And so he's being raised there in the temple. Boy, it is a good idea to raise your kids in church, isn't it? But we'll not go down that road. I really have a speech to give after I tell all these stories, so just settle in. But this story is very important, and there's only one more story after this one, then I'll give my speech. So they're sleeping one night, and Samuel at the temple, he hears a voice, doesn't he? What does the voice say to him? Doesn't call him Fred, calls him Samuel. Says, Samuel. And he runs into the priest and he says, did you call me? And the priest says, no, go back to sleep. The voice appears to him again. Or he hears it again. He runs in again. Hatcher, what does Eli tell him on the second deal? Go back to bed. You're bothering me. Cut me some slack here. It's dark out. What happens after he goes back to bed the next time? A third time, he hears the voice. He runs into Eli, and then Eli says to him, you guys must be speaking this in a lot of different versions of the Bible. Because I'm so old, there weren't any versions other than King James Version when I was in Sunday school. And if it's good enough for Paul and Silas, it's good enough for me. So right then, he says, the next time you hear the voice, say, you got it. These folks down here, they got the right Bible. Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. Wow. Two most important things you can do in life: to recognize the voice of God and to respond to the voice of God. And Eli did that at the temple. But what did he do with that skill? What did he do with that? What happened to him in his life? Well, you go on with Samuel's life. Was he involved in any way? Was he involved in civic affairs or in governance? How did it happen? What happened? Isn't he the guy that, hearing the voice of God, he spoke into the system and it resulted in the appointment of the first king? And then for David. And he was pretty good at hearing the voice of God, because it was David's. Dr. Rogers, what was the name of David's father? Huh? I couldn't hear you. Jesse, yes. Thank you, doctor. And Jesse trotted out all the candidates, didn't he? But Samuel didn't hear. They sent for David. Wow. I guess really what I'm telling you is that the voice of God through the people of God has an important part in the development, selection of leadership for a culture. And the voice of God ought to be heard. So that's what oh boy, time flies when you're having fun. I love talking to you guys. I could just, you can tell I used to be in the Senate. I used to. One more story, though. You know, there's a great story, and it's even story's almost as good as the song is about it, because the song, you know, Joshua hit the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua hit the battle of Jericho, and the walls came a-tumbling down. Whoo! Up to the walls of Jericho, to march with the spear in hand. The Lord commanded the what? Oh, come on, you know the next. The people to what? Shout! You know, how many times did they march around the walls? Did that do any good? Marching around doesn't always get it, does it? There are plenty of people marching. I think it's time for the voice of the people of God to be. Oh, yeah, I think you're right about that. Now, what does it mean? I don't know. Now, we don't all have to feel the same. Let me just say that there's an important point in life, that there's a difference between unity and uniformity. We can be a lot of differences, but still be united. Great orchestras aren't all playing the same notes. They're not all playing the same instruments. They're playing a lot of different stuff, but they play in unity, and it's beautiful. You know, people were afraid of me I was pretty open about my belief and understanding and about the source of all the power and virtue in the universe being God. And people said, you want to impose your religion on people. I don't want to do that, because God didn't impose his religion on people. I tell them it was against my religion to impose my religion. And it is against the other guys, they'll take you out and then they'll string you up if you don't accept their gods. They'll call you a heretic and other things. It's against my religion to impose my religion, but it's not against my religion to expose my religion. And I think there's so much that's been said in the world. They don't want people to expose their religion. They want it to be somehow hidden. And I think we've got to make sure that there is religious freedom, which includes your right to expose your religion, not to impose your religion. So I think that's where we are. And there's a difference between leadership and governance. And I just want to give this, and then I've been promising to quit. You'd think I was a preacher, wouldn't you? As many times as I've said, if I've said the words, and in conclusion, you know. I do love the story about the old man who took his kid to church one time. They never went to church, but they wanted the kid to be familiar with the sanctuary before he went in to be married someday. So he was, had the kid there. And the preacher was going on and on, just preaching, really. It was an ordinary service. And finally, the little kid nudges his dad and says, what's with the names of the people on the wall? His father said, well, those are the people that died in the service. The boy said, the 9 o'clock or the 11 o'clock. But there are fundamental differences between leadership and governance. And I just want to say a couple things about that to you. And remember what the other people said when they were up here tonight. You don't have to remember anything I said. Governance is an important process, and every culture needs it. You set the minimums, the thresholds of what can happen And if people don't clear those thresholds, they don't obey those laws, they're punished. Governance is achieved by impositions and mandates. You mandate certain kinds of activity. You must do this. And if you don't do this, we'll impose these penalties on you. Governance is the imposition of the thresholds. It defines what I would call the lowest and least. Leadership, on the other hand, is something entirely different. Leadership is what Jesus did. And he didn't call us to our lowest and least, because he said, I am come that they might have life and have it. Well, you're getting that one right. And have it more abundantly. You see, Jesus doesn't come to see to it that we all achieve the minimums, that we just barely inch over the threshold, that we get dragged over the lowest hurdle. Jesus is a leader. And as such, he calls us to not our lowest and least, but to our highest and best. You guys are such a good class. It's spectacular. And leadership operates with different mechanics than governance does. Governance operates by mandates and impositions. Leadership operates by inspirations and models. And when you think about great leaders, whether it's Jesus, or whether it's Martin Luther King, or whether it's Abraham Lincoln, it's people who inspired us to our highest and best, and didn't just try to mandate us to our lowest and least. And one of the problems in our culture now is that they don't want us to be able to speak to people about our highest and best. They want us to say that there is a moral parity for everything that's legal. Not so. There are lots of things that are legal that aren't the highest and best. And I think the call of Christ for us is our highest and best. So we want our institutions to make room for the highest and best. And especially in our churches, we should be calling for people to their highest and best. Now, it's not cheap. The currency of real leadership, unfortunately, is sacrifice. Because to inspire people, you have to develop and help people be aware of your commitment to the noble objectives that you're pursuing. And you have to pursue them with such intensity that other people are literally drawn into the operation. And Jesus said, I am willing to pursue restitution, healing, reconciliation, forgiveness with my life. So sacrifice is the currency of leadership. There must be some unreconstructed, broken down old athletes like me in the audience. But I remember when I was playing football, there were always guys in the locker room who would bang on those old metal lockers. If any of you ever, and they'd be chanting in there, kill, kill, blood makes the grass grow, and all those kinds of things that high school boys like to say in the middle of their deal, and I was, what are you laughing about? You were there, huh? And just about the time you're about to step on the field, the guy who's saying the loudest offers to hold your slicker while you go out there, and put your life on the. There are times, sometimes I feel there are other countries like this that don't honor freedom the way we do. They're willing to defend freedom to the very last drop of American blood. Well, real leaders are willing to see their own. There's a difference between a cab driver and a leader. Cab driver, you get in the cab, he throws his arm over the side and said, "Where to, bub?" I feel like saying any road will get you there if you don't care where you're going. A real leader says, let's go to the mountaintop. Let's do something noble. Let's do something historic. Let's do something for the kingdom. Let's realize the potential that God has placed within us, the reason he has created us, the reason God, when he chose to make us choice creatures who have the ability to choose, made us in his own image and shared his own breath in us, and we betray that if we settle for things that are less than what he intended for us. And that's what this whole opportunity is about. So I think you're here. These look like my glasses. I'm sorry. I'm taking them regardless. So I thank you for inviting me to come. I thank you for doing this. It's a little superfluous for me to thank you. If God is writing a book of remembrance about this, what do you care whether some washed up politician from the next door state thinks about you? Invite and celebrate the presence of God in what you're doing. Understand it's not your opportunity to impose God on people, but to make God available and make sure that our children have a circumstance in which they find God available and they are not discriminated against because they believe in Almighty God and what he has intended for them in their lives. That's the kind of leadership that Jesus would expect of us. And that's the kind of leadership that he empowers us to exhibit. God bless you.